One morning in 2017, a woman was leaving her boyfriend's apartment for work. She gets into her car, opens the door, and bam, shots were fired at her. Within seconds, she was laying on the ground deceased. The investigations that followed will reveal a sinister plot that no one saw coming. Who were the orchestrator, the middleman, and the executor of this heinous crime? My name is Annie. Before we find out what happened in this case, you should subscribe to my channel. Otherwise, I'm stuck here. I'm never going to grow without you. Give this video a thumbs up so YouTube can recommend it. Then come with me to Michigan, USA, as we look into the case of Julii Johnson. It was Friday the 13th, 2017 at about 7:30 in the morning. A call was made to 911. The caller told the operator that there had been a shooting in Heritage Village subdivision of Warren, Michigan. About that same time, another call was made to 911 again from the same location. This time it was a man. He was screaming and practically hysterical that his girlfriend had been shot right outside his home. This man who had made the call was a man called Jim Terrell Latner, and the girlfriend who had been shot was 34 years old Julii Johnson. Jim himself was a 44 years old man. Jim had been inside the apartment when he heard the commotion. Then shots rang out, so he ran outside to see what exactly was going on. It was then that he saw that it was his girlfriend Julii who had been shot. She was just there, laying on the floor, lifeless on the front lawn near her car, which was parked outside of Jim's apartment building. It seemed like she was about getting into the car when someone just walked up to her, called out her name, and emptied their weapon into her body. I don't think she even had enough time to react or process exactly what was going on before her attacker shot her in the head. Then the person continued to put more rounds in her body after the one to her head. In total, it came to 7 rounds. Soon as that call came into 911, emergency services were immediately dispatched, and they arrived within minutes and began to work on Julii. They did all they could to at least get her stable, but it seemed everything they tried was not working as Julii remained unresponsive. I mean, she did take one to the head, So their next call was to rush her to the hospital. They immediately put her into the ambulance and rushed her to the nearest hospital. Meanwhile, Jim, the boyfriend, was still hysterical as he just stood by the side watching what was happening and calling family, friends, and loved ones, just telling them that someone had shot his girlfriend. As soon as Julii was put into that ambulance, that area became a crime scene. So police who were now at the scene began to tape it off as they started their investigations immediately. They began to ask questions. They were questioning other residents of the apartment complex to see if anyone at all had seen or heard anything that could point them in the right direction of their investigations. While they were still at it, asking people questions and what they knew about what had just happened, they get the call from the hospital that Julii had passed away. At this point, they knew that Jim was Julii's boyfriend, so they asked him to come with them to the station. Jim at first was uncooperative. Report says that he shouted at the investigators and declined to accompany policemen to the Warren Police Department offices. This is a black man whose woman had been shot. He is distraught. He is angry at this point. He isn't trusting anyone at this point, not even the police. The police understood what was happening at that moment, so they tried to calm him down. Then they asked him to come join them in the back of their cruiser, that they just wanted to talk to him. This is just something that the police does when a situation like this comes up where an individual loses their partner. The police always looks at the other partner first, at least to rule them out before they focus on other aspects of the investigations. The spouses are also the ones who knows the victims better, so they can always give a better insight into how they lived their lives. Julii Johnson was a very beautiful 34-year-old mother of one with a vivacious personality who was originally from Oak Park. Born on August the 25th, 1982, she had a daughter who was grown. Well, not grown per se, because she was still in her teens. She was said to be a very loving mother to her daughter and a very caring person to her family and friends. She was a hard worker who worked as a telephone customer service representative who was good at the services she was providing. July was very independent. Her major focus was her daughter and making money also to secure a bright and stress-free future for her. So she worked really hard to buy a house where she stayed with her child. People who knew her said that July wasn't just a gorgeous woman outside. She was beautiful in the inside too, and this radiated through her so much that she was always smiling. Whenever you saw her, she was always smiling. Now, we do not know much about July's upbringing up until the time that she gave birth to her daughter, but it's said that as a young person, as a young lady growing up, July lived life. She was that it girl. She was that girl who liked to party and to have fun and hang around bad boys because that was her type of thing. But later on in life, as she grew and became more mature as an adult, she became more focused and her priority changed to making money and taking care of her family. But she hoped that one day she will meet that man that will sweep her off her feet once again and they will have and build a fantastic family together. In 2014, July's path crossed with Jim and she instantly felt drawn to him. She liked him the first time she saw him. Her friends said that from that moment onwards, she wouldn't stop talking about Jim. So they were like, wait a minute, we have to hook up our girl, we have to hook up our girl with this guy that she likes so much because they hadn't seen her like this over anyone in a very long time. Ultimately, the two would start dating and July was on cloud 9. Everyone who knew of the relationship said that July loved Jim very much and Jim loved her right back. He was good to her and took good care of her. Even though she had her own thing going on, he made it his responsibility to take care of her. So now Jim wasn't doing by himself. He had a very successful business and he was well spoken, very polite and charismatic. And he was a one-woman's man. So all that stress of cheating and all of that wasn't an issue in their relationship. People knew that Jim owned a car wash in Detroit, Michigan at his old neighborhood where he used to hang out growing up, which he made good money. But seeing that July was attracted to the bike boy type and Jim didn't look like one, people wondered how they managed to be so in love with each other because Jim really doted on July like she was his entire world. They almost cannot stay a day without seeing each other. So much, July practically spends a majority of her free time at Jim's apartment. Even though she had her own house, of course, Jim wanted her around at all times and she was more than willing to stay with him because she loved being with him. She would close from work and go right to Jim's place, and most mornings she would go to work from Jim's place. It was while getting into her car to go to work after spending the night at Jim's place that someone walks up to her and opens fire on her, taking her life instantly. So while Jim is sitting there in the car with the police being questioned about July, he was talking to them in the present, not knowing that July didn't make it. The police could not keep that information from him any longer, so they had to tell him that July had succumbed to her injuries, that she wasn't coming back home. Jim was distraught. That wasn't the news he was expecting to hear. He was holding out hope that the doctors could save her, so it pained him a lot. The police had to let him go grieve because he couldn't continue talking to them at this point. The police were also saddled with the responsibility of letting July's family know that she had passed away, something they say is very difficult for them to do, no matter how many times they had done it before. I mean, looking into someone's eyes and telling them, oh, sorry, your son or your daughter didn't make it, is not something anyone will be looking forward to. When the news got to July's family that she was deceased, her family was overtaken with grief, and the way she was murdered was something they just didn't understand. July had never had issues with anyone up to the extent of the person wanting to take her life. She was a happy, jolly, good woman who was in love and was focused on raising her teenage daughter and making herself money. So Who does she have beef with that wanted her so badly to be deleted from the face of the earth? Her friends did say that Julii was envied by a host of women though because of how physically attracted she was and how her appeal usually attracted a lot of men, even their own men. I mean, it's not her fault that she's gorgeous and in tune with her femininity, but there was just no one they could point at to say, oh, this is the person who had bad intentions towards Julii, I meant to say. Now, during that chat Jim had with the policemen in the car at the crime scene, they had asked him to walk them through what he saw that day before calling the police. And he tells them that when he had the shots ring out, he immediately drops what he was doing and runs out of his apartment. The first thing he saw, even before seeing Julii laying down, was a man of medium build who had been wearing a dark hoodie, and this man was running down a nature trail by the side of the apartment complex. The police had already heard the same description Jim was giving them from the other person who had called 911 initially. So they knew that there was something there that they needed to look into. But for now, that description was too vague for them to use. So in the meantime, they needed to officially rule out Jim as a person of interest. You know, it's not uncommon that a person's life is taken, and even though everything looks good on the outside, it eventually comes up that the spouse was responsible for what had happened. Even if they might not have done it themselves, they could have easily hired anyone to do it. The police got a search warrant for Jim's home and car, and what they saw at both places came as a total shock to everyone. So in Jim's house, the police discovered massive stacks of $100 bills bound together by elastic bands, which turned out to be over $500,000 in cash in two burner phones. Then they were also found in his car, which is a white 2016 Ford pickup truck. They found a 9mm Ruger, which had its serial number scratched up. They also found in the car two more burner phones and an additional $12,000 in cash. And this is not all. Jim's car was custom designed with hidden compartments where airbags are normally mounted. They were like, what in the world is going on? Who was this man and how did he come about so much money in cash? And why would anyone need so many burner phones? And the hidden compartment in his car, it was a straight giveaway. This was something that the police were very familiar with. It was common with substance dealers who use it to hide their merchandise, money, and other stuff from the authorities. So this means that Jim, the good-looking, charismatic, loving, and soft-spoken Jim, who seemed like a legitimate business owner, was not what people thought he was. This man owned a whole successful car wash. Now, coming to think of it, the type of money Jim commanded and the things he did for Julii and other people, because he was said to be very generous, you know, the things that he did for them was way much more than a car wash could easily finance. Well, having found out all of this, Jim began to look more suspicious to the authorities, so they had to do a thorough background check on Jim. And oh boy, the stuff that they found out was mind-blowing. Like, investigators found that this man, Jim, had a long rap sheet that revolved around the sales and distribution of illegal substance back at his stomping grounds in Detroit. He was well known and feared as the leader of an illegal substance running crew that the police were very familiar with. They were known as the World Dominion Gang. That's what they were called. At the time, Jim was out on life probation for federal substance and weapon charges, so him having a weapon in his possession was an outright violation of his probation rules. So the police arrested him. They went to Julii's family to question them about what they knew about Jim and his illegal substance running, and they didn't know anything about it, even though the question didn't come as a surprise to them, because all this while, they too have been wondering how on earth Julii was so attracted to Jim. They knew her type to be the bad boy, so now they understood better why that relationship worked. Anyways, the police are thinking Jim's affiliation may have caused what happened to Julii. What if the attack was in retaliation for something he did? Because at this point, it wasn't making any sense that someone would just walk up to Julii and put a round in her head for no apparent reason. The police went to talk to Jim while he was in federal custody to ask him again whom he thought would have had it out for July, and he told them without mincing word that his ex-girlfriend was capable of doing such a thing. Earlier on, the police had found really nasty messages that had been sent to him from this ex of his concerning July, so this ex-girlfriend was worth looking into at this point. Jim's ex-girlfriend was a 46-year-old woman called Marcy Griffin. They had dated for a whole 17 years and had 2 children together before they broke up. It's not exactly clear why they went their separate ways, but Marcy got with another man after the separation and Jim got with July. Word on the street was that Marcy, Jim's ex, didn't totally let go of her feelings for him even though she had gotten with other men. She was still stuck up on Jim and always trying to, insert herself in Jim's business, and that includes his relationship with July. It was said that right from the beginning of July and Jim's relationship in 2014, Marcy began stalking and harassing July. I think she wasn't expecting Jim to find a replacement for her. When he did, she thought she was all that Jim would ever have. She thought that Jim would not be able to function without her and the kids. But when he saw the very beautiful and intimidating woman Jim got with, it pained her to the core. This woman, Marcy, will go to July's office where she worked as a customer service representative and insult and threaten her for apparently no reason but just because she was dating her ex. Jim talked to Marcy about leaving his woman alone on multiple occasions, but she wouldn't budge. July was uncomfortable with this messy situation, but Jim asked her not to worry about it, that she will calm down with time, but Marcy's behavior never did calm down. Ultimately, her anger and rage went over the edge on the day she got to know that Jim and July had gone to Las Vegas. Now, while stalking Jim on his social media to see what he has been up to like she had always done, Marcy says that he had posted a picture of himself and July in Vegas for the New Year's celebration in 2017, and she flipped. In her mind, she was thinking that Jim and July had gone to Vegas to have an impromptu wedding. Meanwhile, she had been in a relationship with Jim for 17 years and he never agreed to wipe her up. From that day, Marcy had it out for Jim and July. She waited for them to get back from their trip. Then she popped up at his place of business, the car wash. She cursed and abused him so much and promised him that she would hit him where it would hurt the most. When Jim told the police about Marcy, they paid her a visit at her place of work, but Marcy refused to see or speak with the police without a warrant, which they didn't have. The police thought that was weird. If she didn't have anything to hide, why wouldn't she just talk to them and, just clear herself? So now that Marcy was not talking, they wanted to be sure where she was at the time of the crime. At that time when July was attacked, it was in the morning on a work day. So since they were at Marcy's job, they took the liberty to request for the CCTV footage of that day. And on that CCTV footage, they were able to determine that Marcy was at her job. They saw her walk into her office and she was still in the building when July was attacked. So now that Marcy had a strong alibi, the police had to find another way to nail July's attacker. So they left her alone for the time being, but they put a request in for her phone record so they could totally rule her out. In the meantime, remember that eyewitnesses, including Jim, had said that they saw the attacker fleeing through the nature trail near the apartment complex, right? The police went over there to the location to see if they can find anything. And if you recall, just like that, the police found what they were looking for. A 9mm Smith & Wesson and a pair of hand gloves that the perpetrator had flung while he was running. So now that they found some evidence in that area, they thought that there could be more evidence, so they brought in K9 unit to sniff out any additional evidence that could be laying there. And sure enough, they found the 7 shell casings to the rounds that were fired when July was shot. Now, in that area where all this evidence were found was a shopping complex just adjacent. So they went over and collected videos from every working CCTV camera from the businesses operating at the complex. It was on one of these footages that they saw a black SUV parked in front of an LA Fitness just near the nature trail at about 7 a.m. on the morning of the crime. A few minutes later, a man was seen coming out of the passenger side of the SUV. This man was of the same physical description as the man seen by eyewitnesses. So this man comes out of the car and walks away. A couple of minutes pass and he's again seen returning to the SUV. Only this time he wasn't walking, he was running as he gets into the car. The SUV pulls out of the location on high speed afterwards. Now it has been established that there was really a man such as the one described by eyewitnesses fleeing the crime scene, and the man had come and gone in a black SUV. It was also established that there was another man in that SUV who was the getaway driver. So the police were like, they were now tasked with looking for two men instead of one person, the attacker and the driver. But the footage they had was not of good quality, so it wasn't feasible to get their faces. Neither were they able to make out the license plate number of the vehicle. So it seemed like the case was just basically coming to a standstill, but suddenly there was hope. DNA test result had come in for all the items that were found on the nature trail, and forensic examiners had found a match for the DNA sample that was retrieved from the hand gloves. It was a perfect match to a man known as Eric Gibson. Now, there is no doubt that this Eric guy, whoever he was responsible for this despicable act, because the 9mm Smith & Wesson found at the same location as the gloves were also a perfect match to the rounds that were recovered from Julii's body. The police began to look into Eric Gibson. He was a 24-year-old man who was of medium build, just as described by eyewitnesses. They began to look for him, but it seemed like he was being evasive. The police didn't have an exact address for him, so it was harder to track him down. But fortunately for them, they knew the area where Eric hung out, so they staked it out until they found him. When detectives approached Eric, he tried to take off running, like literally. He is surrounded by men in uniform and he pushes them out of his way and attempts to run. Why do they always run? I mean, this is something that we keep saying over and over again. The moment they see the police, they just bolt. Well, when the police pulled out their firearm and threatened to discharge them, he stopped and gave in, as the police arrested him and took him over to the station for questioning. Eric climbed up as soon as he got to the station. He wouldn't talk. He refused to talk, so they could not get any information from him. The police turned to Eric's phone records to get answers and to find that piece of evidence that would link Eric to Julii, but sadly, there was nothing there that was of any use to them. In the meantime, they had other members of the investigations team looking into Eric's rap sheet. That was when they found something of interest. It wasn't much, but it was promising. So a couple of days before the attack on Julii, Eric was pulled over while driving a black SUV. And that black SUV, when they checked it out, looked exactly like the one they had seen on CCTV cameras dropping off and driving away the hooded man who had attacked Julii. When they looked further, they discovered that the car did not actually belong to Eric. It was in fact registered to a name called George Ryder. And George Ryder, he was a man that the police knew too well. He was an older man of about 58 years with a very, very long rap sheet. He was a criminal that was in the game of selling illegal substances just like Jim. But at the time, George was seemingly no longer in the game. He was now said to be a real estate developer with a music promoting business on the side. If you heard me talk about Jim's car and business, you will know by now that all this real estate and music promoting brouhaha is just another front for something illegal. Anyways, the police wanted to find out what the link was with George and Eric, and they got to know that Eric was in fact George's nephew. This discovery made the police to begin to second-guess their initial thought that maybe Marcy had hired Eric to take out Julii. Now that they know that George, Eric's uncle, was also as shady as Jim, they thought that this was a war between two underground bosses. One of the theories was that George had wanted to get at Jim and had used his nephew to hit Jim where it would hurt the most. They tried to work this angle of the case, but unfortunately, they just couldn't find the link between these two men, Jim and George. In fact, the two men had never crossed paths. They didn't even know each other. But the Eric-George situation was looking more and more suspicious because of the events leading up to the day Julii was attacked. Now, on the morning of Julii's murder, Pings from cell phone towers in the metro Detroit area had put them both, that's Eric and George, in the same area at the same time. Phone records show that both George and Eric traveled together from Detroit to Warren. Just before 7 a.m., both of their phones were turned off with no activity, but then both were again turned back on at the same time at about 7:30 a.m., where they both pinged at the same cell towers as they traveled back to the point in Detroit where they had linked up initially. This discovery left police thinking, okay, was George the elusive driver that they were looking for? While investigators were still pondering on how to proceed with the case, boom, they get another break. Remember that Master's phone records were pulled and were being looked into. Detectives find among her text messages some texts that she had been sending back and forth with a number that wasn't saved on her cell phone. Considering the content of this message, it was strange that the number wasn't saved on her phone. There were a series of text messages that were exchanged on the night prior to July's attack, and it ended the morning after. Investigators tried to find out who the phone was registered to, but it turns out to be a burner, but it was still traced to none other than George Ryder. Now the police had to find a way to get that cell phone from George. They invited him into their police cruiser to have a chat concerning his nephew Eric, who had been linked to the crime. They asked him about what he knew, and he said that he knew absolutely nothing. They asked him to leave, even though they were kind of suspicious at this point that he might just be lying through his teeth. They told him before he left to hand over the cell phone he had on him before he left. They had a court order to seize the phone, and for some dumb reason, he was out thinking that police wouldn't find anything on it that would tie him to the investigation. So he had been carrying this burner on himself all about all this while. When investigators checked the burner phone, they found numerous messages that were sent between George and Marcy. It was glaring at this point that the two were in a full-blown love affair or relationship, whatever you want to call it. But that wasn't what the police were looking for exactly. They wanted that particular thing that would be the reason they arrest these people. That was when they saw an exchange between Marcy and George on the morning of July's attack. On that morning, George wrote to Marcy, "Good morning, sunshine. Today is a beautiful day, Friday the 13th. And Marcy replied and said, LOL. George said, "I hope you understand." And Mercy said she does. Her exact words were, "Everything about it, I understand." This was what the police were looking for. They theorized that Marcy had made plans with her lover to take out her arch enemy for good, and George, wanting to do anything for his woman, asked his nephew Eric to do it. So he drove Eric to the location himself that morning to get it done. That message was, in fact, Marcy and George joking about what was going to happen to July that morning. Like, what I don't understand is having to take another woman's life because you can't get over your ex, even when you're clearly with another man. Fast forward to February of 2017, the three people involved, which are Marcy, the orchestrator, George, the middleman, and Eric, the executor, were all arrested and charged with premeditated murder. When George was arrested, the feds immediately got involved because apparently, unknown to him, he had been on their watch list. They had in fact been watching George for 2 decades, that's 20 full years. George in his younger days had done a lot of crime and done time for some of them. He got incarcerated in the 90s and was released in 2003. Upon his release, he suddenly claimed to have given up his old ways and was now into real estate. He was able to cop up some really nice property that includes the Fine Arts Theater in downtown Detroit, which he later sold in 2015 for a whopping $1.3 million US. But before he sold that property, a young woman called Valerie had been murdered in the bathroom of that building back in 2007, and the feds have been waiting for an opportunity to nab him for that and other crimes he committed while under their surveillance. A federal agent called Karen Reynolds was personally invested in George because the deceased, Valerie, was her best friend. So she wanted George on a RICO indictment so she can have his head for what he did to her friend. RICO simply means Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. Feel free to read up on it if you want to know more about RICO indictment. Now, the prosecutors of this case laid it out in court that Mercy masterminded all of this because of her jealousy and hatred towards Julii, and just like I said before, had asked George to take care of it for her, and he in turn contracted his nephew to do it. Mercy's defense said that she knew nothing about this and that George did it in a quest to please Mercy because he knew she didn't like Julii. Eric maintained that he was innocent. He even gave a statement, part of which reads, quote, "My condolences to the family for their loss. I hope they find the person who committed this heinous crime," end quote. He even added that the police illegally obtained his DNA and tampered with evidence to make it look like he committed the crime when he did not. By the end of the trial in 2019, all three individuals were found guilty and handed life sentences with no possibility of parole. Following the verdict, Julii's family had given an emotional statement in court. Julii's teenage daughter, 17-year-old Kara, poured out her heart as she addressed Mercy. It was very emotional to see how hurt she was that Mercy was just sitting there and refusing to take responsibility for what she set in motion. What was so much hatred for? Her mother, Pamela Johnson, asked. How can you, as a human being, have so much hatred in you? She later added, you know your role, your part in this, and you have to live with it every day, end quote. The defense for all three came together to request for a retrial on the grounds that Mercy, George, and Eric never stood a chance to prove their innocence because the jury was mostly a white jury, but that motion was denied. How did they even come up with all of that? Did they not see the evidences in front of them? Sometimes it's not about a race. It's not always about race, you know. It's just that some people are just plain evil, irrespective of their race. I believe if these three were all white and they were brought to court with the same evidences, they would still be found guilty. Julii was a hardworking single mother who didn't deserve to go out like that. If not for the crazy obsession of an ex-girlfriend, she would have still been alive. And the stupid man who would arrange a hit like this on a woman because another lady that he was dealing with was still crazy over her ex is just plain stupid. As of today, Eric is incarcerated at the Macomb Correctional Facility in Lenox, Michigan. George is serving his sentence at Saginaw Correctional Facility in Freeland, Michigan, and Mercy is at Ladies Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan. As for Jim, he pleaded the fifth during the trial so as not to incriminate himself. He was only charged for the firearm that was reportedly located in his vehicle, and that was that. Well, that's it for today's case, guys. Thank you for staying with me. So now, if you haven't subscribed, don't you think it's high time that you did? Click that notification bell, click that subscribe button, turn on the notification so that you don't miss any of my uploads. Until next video, stay safe.